So please welcome Ken McCarty.
Thank you. In case any of you don't know what dairying is, we're the guys that make the stuff that you dip the Oreos in. So thank you very much for having me here. My talk today is going to be a little bit more pragmatic. I try to implement everything everyone else talked about in a pretty down-to-earth way. So again, I'm Ken McCarty. I'm the youngest of the four McCarty brothers. Dairy operation primarily located in western Kansas, span across 3 states, 1 farm here in Nebraska, 1 in Ohio. So a little bit about the history of us, and it's a little bit color-coded, and I'll explain to that here in a second. But 4th generation family farm. My great-grandfather started it in northeastern Pennsylvania. Very small, typical red barn on the side hill, cows out on pasture, that sort of thing. Passed down to my grandfather. My father and my mother bought some land from my grandfather and moved up the road, and that's where I grew up. In the early 90s, my dad and mom said, hey, we're not going to be able to survive here. We have to move. So looked all over the U.S. and settled in quite possibly the most polar opposite place of northeastern PA that you could find in the U.S., northwest Kansas. For those of you that think Lincoln's in the middle of everywhere and nowhere, you need to come to Colby. And the reason why I have that upper piece coated green is we always had a belief in trying to do more good. But when you're subject to the market and you don't really have a connection to where your product goes, those efforts can be somewhat herky-jerky. In 2012, we entered into a relatively unique relationship with Dannon Yogurt. Everybody in here know who Dannon Yogurt is? Oikos, Activia, Danimals. And that really helped, one, enable us to be able to sharpen our focus to do more good, but also gave us a pathway and a channel to express that and to get behind a cause that really could be bigger than us. So, yeah, over the years, we've done some things that are relatively unique in the dairy industry. 2017 became non-GMO project verified, a little butterfly logo on the side of a cup of yogurt. Became the only dairy in the world in that same year to complete 4 different Validus audits. Validus is a little bit of a wonky technical dairy term, but it's essentially animal welfare audits, worker care audits, environmental stewardship audits, and a few other things. And then most recently, we moved back to the East Coast, or closer to the East Coast, and began a new dairy in Salina, Ohio. Current farm stats, 4 brothers, Mike, Clay, David, and myself. I'm the youngest and best looking of all of them, by far the most intelligent. And 5 farms, 3 in Kansas, 1 in southwest Nebraska, and most recently 1 in Ohio. Approximately 200 team members, primarily on the farm side, but also we have an evaporative condensing plant that is part of our journey to do more good from an environmental sustainability standpoint, but also enables us to serve Dannon yogurt manufacturing plants throughout the country. Office staff, trucking staff, so on and so forth. Farm a little bit over 2,600 acres. Again, trying to implement some things that move us down the path of environmental sustainability on those acres. About 22,000 cows total, and we produce approximately 1.125 million pounds of milk a day, of which all of it essentially ends up, we hope, in Dannon yogurt. So this is ultimately what we're trying to create. In our historical model, this wasn't necessarily possible because our connection to where our product went ultimately ended at the back of a milk trailer. We didn't know where it went, we didn't know who consumed it, we didn't know how to make it better. We didn't know what the customer that ultimately bought it wanted. We had no connection. So in our move to partner, in essence, with Dannon, we've been able to bring this full circle. And our goal for our future is, and this is not an all-inclusive list, it just, crop, cow, cup, consumer, it kind of flows well. But our goal is to create a synergistic system that benefits all stakeholders. The fundamental piece of that is that we have to obviously feed the cow, grow the crop, feed the cow, put it in a cup, and then somebody's got to eat it. So ultimately, this is our story of how we are striving for that. And along the way, how we're trying to do more good within this system. So our first step in this journey was ultimately connecting a brand to our product. How and why did we come together? For those of you that are familiar with the ag world, you may know that ag markets are increasingly volatile. We weren't the most cash-rich people in the world, so we really couldn't handle volatility in the markets. We were striving for a different model and a model that could sustain our family into the future, that eliminated those hills and valleys in terms of price point. And Dannon was ultimately searching for the same thing. So we together started in 2010. Our visions were immediately aligned, but when you get lawyers and bankers and all that involved, it kind of really slows things down a lot. But ultimately, we were able to create what's called the cost performance model, where in essence, my cost of production is what it is, and I'm guaranteed a margin on top of that. But that cost of production includes things like efforts towards sustainability, efforts towards community redevelopment, efforts towards animal welfare. We have a brand that supports us in that journey, and thus we support them in their journey as well. Ultimately, that's all founded on a shared vision of environmental sustainability, animal and stakeholder welfare. I can't sell you milk if I don't have happy cows. So that's kind of a foundational principle. Financial stability and predictability, community sustainability, and then ultimately, how do we engage with a consumer and create a higher degree of satisfaction? This absolutely cannot work without a whole boatload of trust. Ultimately, my future, the future of my family, is in their hands, and a lot of their brand recognition is in my hands. If I screw that up, they've got probably a bigger problem than I do, actually. And then ultimately, it's all about transparency. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Not everybody in the world is willing to lift the hood up and show everything you have. We've been willing to do that, but ultimately we had to really learn how to do that because it's not very common in the dairy industry and the ag industry in general. But ultimately, you have to really want to be different. The butterfly logo, when we embarked on that journey, not everybody was happy with us in the industry. The same thing with all the Validus certificates. A bit controversial, and for a lot of reasons that I won't go into here today, but you have to be willing to put on that bulletproof vest and withstand the storm a little bit. And then in order to kind of bring that circle to fruition, we have to ultimately connect ourselves to our suppliers, our primary suppliers being the guys that grow us feed, that help us achieve all that we want to achieve. And our goal with that is to take the Dannon model of trust and transparency and open communication and collaboration and branch that out to all of our suppliers. It's a little bit uncomfortable at first. It's not always easy, but the non-GMO transition really encourages this. It encourages us to have a direct understanding of our entire supply chain, particularly on the feed side, but then we've taken that model and tried to branch it out to every key supplier that we have. And I can assure you that it's a little bit interesting when you ask a company that's never been asked for their social responsibility statements. You ask them that question and they look at you like you have 5 heads. That's not a typical question asked by dairy farmers. But it's going to be important for us to achieve all the goals that we want to achieve. And also this direct relationship and openness and transparencies allows us to understand all parties to understand what the other party wants and needs to have. Ultimately, if I want my farm to survive into the next generation, I have to have a community that's there. I have to have farmers to support me. I have to have water to pump. I have to have healthy soil to sustain me. I cannot be transactional. That takes a little bit for people to get their minds wrapped around. I want you to make money. I want you to be here tomorrow. I'm not trying to slash and burn here. I have to have you alongside me, holding my hand on this journey. And then ultimately, we have to be able to prove that what we're doing is having a positive impact. So we have to have a system to collect, analyze, and share actual real-world data. We have to be able to build a baseline so that we can show that, hey, what we are doing is making a difference, whether that be in water use or chemical and pesticide use, fertilization, energy use, kids in the school system, you name it. We're trying to track all of that and track it in partnership with everybody that feeds into our farms so that we can demonstrate that to you or to the Walmarts of the world or to the NGOs that support or attack us. We're trying to build a system to not just say that we're doing a good job, but prove it. And eco practices here in the bottom right-hand corner, your left-hand corner, is ultimately the tool that we're using to do that. It's an all-encompassing tool that basically we spit all of our data into it, and it formulates it into some very consumer-friendly language. So instead of me telling you that I saved 183 acre-feet of water by using soil moisture probes last year, which no one understands, I can say I saved the equivalent of 115 Olympic-sized swimming pools, that sort of stuff. And then ultimately, we have to be willing to talk about it. This is obviously not my normal day-to-day role, and I'm not really comfortable here, by the way, but I'm the youngest of four brothers, so they voted me in. But anyway, we have to be able and willing to tell our collective story. So we're no longer on PAC, by the way. That was a failed product, but I don't think it was because we were on there. But, we have to be willing to show people who we are. We are a big farm. Big farms are controversial to a lot of people, but big isn't bad. Bad is bad. Then we want to be able to talk about and promote what we view as victories, VALDA certificates. It's not easy, and it matters. We want to talk about that. Non-GMO, it's not easy. It's important. It's diversity in the ecosystem. It's a great thing. We want to be able to talk about it. Eco practices, how do we talk about it? That's ultimately how we do it. And then ultimately being willing and able to open ourselves up. The volume of school tours and farm tours and visits that we give on our farms, whether it be to governmental officials, university people, school kids, it doesn't matter. We're not perfect, but we're at least willing to engage in the dialogue and ultimately willing to show you that, hey, no, I'm not perfect, but I'm trying. And then this is a little bit more pragmatic stuff about what are we actually trying to do, so you don't think I'm just blowing smoke at you here. So what's exciting about this is we can go from incredibly complex, real wonky type stuff that only people in ag understand to stuff that you can do. Trying to increase biodiversity. I can't really be all that impactful in my day-to-day life on the plight of the Javan rhino, but I can on honeybees. So we're trying to act where we can. Bug boxes, people get grossed out, but bat boxes, bird houses, anything that we can do to promote our local and natural environment, we're trying to do that. People look at us like we have three heads, but for those that actually listen and are excited about it, anybody can do this. And it doesn't cost you a lot of money. Heck, your kids can build that for you if you want. Sustainability projects. Talked about soil moisture probes. For those that, well, even here in Lincoln, we sit atop a declining water source. Water is an absolutely fundamental, critical issue that we have to address. We're trying to be leaders in that by deploying soil moisture probes. We're able to cut, give or take, depending on the cooperation of Mother Nature, our water use to grow our primary ingredient, feed, by approximately half. That's hundreds of millions of gallons that we can save. But it's not just enough in our viewpoint to save it. We have to talk about it. We have to try to inspire. We have to try to encourage other people to do that. And there's some selfish reasons for why we want to do that. If I'm trying to do a good job and my neighbor's pumping to beat the band and he sucks all the water out, I'm hosed too. I have to try to get my overarching community to believe too. Cover crops, carbon sequestration is ultimately what the goal is there, creating a healthier soil. This is an overarching Dannon initiative, but frankly, it's just a pretty big deal. World's getting hotter, we got to try to figure out a way to fix it. That's our effort. And then an evaporative condensing plant. An evaporative condensing plant is what we implemented in our relationship with Dannon. The goal being that we keep the water. In essence, what we do is we pull water out of the milk and we ship a more dense product. But we're trying to keep that water over the ground that it was pumped from. And in doing so, what we also do is we reduce the freight of finished goods by about 75%. So it allows us here in the middle of the country to serve everywhere. You know, we talk oftentimes about the fact that we're in the middle of everywhere and we're in the middle of nowhere. It's an opportunity and it's a threat. And community projects and welfare projects, we've implemented what we call a Yogurt for Youth program, where we donate, numbers vary, through cooperation with Dannon and also our checkoff groups, donate in the ballpark of, first year was $250,000. Recently it's fallen off a little bit, but round numbers, 100,000 servings of yogurt a year. We can't do that alone. We don't do that alone. We do that in partnership with Dannon. We do that in partnership with our checkoff dollars. We do that in partnership with our local school systems. There's a reason why we did that I won't go into, but suffice it to say that Kansas had a bad governor for a while. And, sorry. Housing. Something that people in rural communities don't really think about, or people from urban communities don't think a lot about in rural communities, but we don't have enough houses. If I want to grow my business, I got to have some place for people to live. And as such, we've worked with the state of Kansas to try to donate ground, guarantee rent on homes that they'll build. Long after we're gone, hopefully that'll be a benefit to the community anyway. Even little no-cost, low-cost things like building a library for the truck drivers that come to our farms. Doesn't matter, maybe to somebody. And the stuff that everybody actually really enjoys a lot more than a condensing plant or a library is the cows, right? Welfare projects. And yes, the foundation of what I do is centered around her. But what I'm also trying to do is I'm trying to enhance the image of that. And I'm trying to encourage the industry to adopt practices like this. We have a less than polite phrase, but manure splatters, right? So if neighbor down the road does a really bad job, I look bad regardless. We're trying to, one, be good stewards of the industry, but two, encourage the industry to adopt best practices. We are responsible for one another. An animal activist video shot on a farm has ramifications in my life, whether or not I did it or not. So we're trying to encourage everyone to not have that happen. And anytime a tour leaves my farm, they don't know about Validus. They don't remember non-GMO. They might remember the way it smells, but they remember brushes. They remember toys for the cows. So it matters. And then where are we trying to go from here? Ultimately, that's a synopsis of what we've done. Where are we trying to go? We're trying to increase our knowledge in our work with our upstream. And again, like I mentioned earlier, that's a different conversation to have. Not many people are accustomed to having that conversation within the dairy industry. Most groups that we work with are not fully prepared yet to answer the question about what their sustainability policies are. Our hope is that in beginning these conversations, you begin to start a sea change, and they begin to think about it, and they begin to work on those things. And ultimately, the whole goal of that is to create a more sustainable supply chain. And then we want to create a better food production system, whether that be through the use of cover crops and carbon sequestration or lower water use or you name it. But I can't do that unless I have an open line of communication with my entire supply chain to know what's broken. How can we work together to fix it? And then ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to create a better product. And that better product might be a more sustainably created product. It might be a product that serves a specific nutritional need. But again, it all comes back to communication and being open and honest with one another about what we need and what we can do. And at times, what it also takes is kind of shooting the moon a little bit and saying, hey, you know what I think I can do? And just throwing out the BHAGs, right? And trying to do something that is totally crazy. If we don't get all the way there, we still did something cool, still did something better. Why? These guys. My kids, by the way. And that's the warm, fuzzy, feel-good reason why, right? Want you to like my presentation, so I put really cute kids there. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of reasons why. Yes, I want to leave the world a better place for them. Yes, I want to have a business that maybe they won't come back, maybe they will. But there's other reasons. You heard Don talk about yesterday. We've been doing these things for 7 years and have had, short of the intrinsic value, very little payback on those. Today, we're having conversations with RFS and Replant about my business getting cheaper. I could potentially reap the economic rewards of investment in things that are not necessarily economically based. That's exciting. The goal being that there's a ton of different reasons as to why we're trying to make the world a better place. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter why. It just matters, it just matters if you're trying. So that's what we're trying to do. And then, any questions? That's not what the real statue looks like, by the way. No, nothing? Oh, yes, sir.
How much of your tours with children, how much of the Do More Good model that you have are you sharing with kids when they come through on the school tours? Are they fully aware of how the work operations different?
Yeah. So the question being is how much of our efforts at being better and doing more good do we share with school-age kids? And we try to share as much as we think they're capable of understanding. Obviously, there's a pretty big difference of what they're going to understand from the kindergarten tour that really just wants a cup of yogurt and to get out of school, or the 8th grade FFA team, right? So we try to communicate at their level. So for example, the kindergarten kids, we're going to talk a lot about animal welfare. They get it. The older, more knowledgeable kids, we're going to talk about things like carbon sequestration and water conservation and the impact of cover crops, those sort of things. But again, yeah, we try to share as much as we think they're capable of really grasping, and with a hope that, hey, they walk out of there and they retain maybe 5%. So, Rita.
Where did your motivation for going this path start? Did it start with the Danone relationship? Did it start earlier? And
Yeah.
Secondly, how come you only have sons and brothers? Are there any girls in your family?
Yeah, yes, there is actually. So, yeah, we've got four. I've got four nieces, but yeah, it was pretty male dominated for a while. So, you gotta bless my mom. But anyway, where did the motivation come from? The motivation was always there, but the motivation, the sharpened focus on that motivation really came about with the Dannon model, and for a few fold reasons. One, I'm going to be blunt with you. We were broke going into that model, right? And we had to make that work. So our goal was, you know, we're probably not the best dairy in the world, right? But that doesn't matter. I need to be the best dairy to them. You know, right now they've got a lot of other dairies that source them milk in the same model. And this model may not exist 5 years from now. But at the end of the day, I want to be the last man standing. I know that's not necessarily the most hold hands and sing kumbaya type mentality, but at the end of the day, I can't do any of this good if I don't exist anymore. So the motivation was there, but in working in the Dannon model, we had selfish motivation there, but also as we've continued down that path, the simple reality is that, hey, you know, we can change the world. We can make the world a better place. And to me, it's pretty freaking cool that you can do it by just milking cows. You know? Yes, sir.
You're clearly doing a lot of good things. Just playing devil's advocate, though.
Yep.
Animal welfare.
Mm-hmm.
And are you taking steps to appease, essentially, vegans?
So are we necessarily? Not really, because our business model doesn't really focus around that. Now, that being said, we are exploring ways in which we can diversify our offerings to Dannon. Dannon doesn't just sell dairy-based yogurt. Obviously, they've got plant-based products, things like that. So we're exploring avenues where we can incorporate raw goods to flow into that plant-based supply chain that match well with the needs on the farm side and try to create ultimately a regenerative cycle that I can benefit multiple aspects of Dannon and benefit my farm as well and benefit the soil. Things like oats, for example. So not directly on our farms, but directly in our overarching business model, yeah, we are exploring things like that. Yes, ma'am.
What do you think is the best thing that you've seen from your changes in your community?
Ooh. Well, that's a good one.
Could you repeat that question, please?
Yes, so the question is, what do we think is the best thing that's happened in our communities based off the changes that we've made? Pretty simple. Schools have stayed. So to expound on that a little bit, you know, my brother lives in a town with 400 people. 400, that's not many, right? That school is on the verge of closing. Approximately 40-ish% of that entire school population is children of dairy employees. So that's a big one. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that y'all are really working to influence the dairy industry and these practices. If you could share with us some of the impact that you've seen as a result of leading the way with other dairy farmers, and if you could also share with us some resistance that you've seen in the industry and possibly vilification for what you're doing.
Yeah, so the easy part is to address the vilification piece, right? You always remember that stuff a lot more than you do the pats on the back. But yeah, so for example, when we went down the road of non-GMO, that was part of a much bigger movement within Dannon. And it encapsulated things like animal welfare, like Validus. There's a couple different programs that are industry adopted programs for conventional farms like ours that center around animal welfare. And there's some groups within the industry that were very upset that Dannon and McCarty and ultimately other Dannon producers stuck their flag in the ground on Validus and not the other program. They viewed it as we were saying one is better than the other. And my personal opinion is that's accurate, but any progress is good progress, right? And then along the lines of the non-GMO piece, there was a tremendous amount of pressure put back, even from people that we consider close friends, on what they viewed as an effort by us and Dannon to pitch one milk versus another. That wasn't the case. What we're trying to create is optionality. If a consumer has a passionate desire to have non-GMO milk, we want to deliver that, because ultimately that's better for the industry. Keeping people back in the dairy aisle. If you look at dairy statistics, people aren't really hanging out in the dairy aisle a whole lot anymore. If we can keep people in the dairy aisle, that's a good thing for the industry. But there were groups within the industry that did not feel that way, and there was some pushback, honestly, from some of the crop supply companies, multinational crop seed supply companies, that they don't make as much money on non-traded seeds as they do traded seeds. So there was a lot of economic drivers behind that they weren't very happy about. There were some other, yes ma'am.
I'm wondering if you would talk more about your workforce. I think of the dairy industry, and I think of a lot of new Americans, immigrant families.
Yeah.
And I know that can get a lot of pushback too. What does doing good mean for your workforce? How do you attract them?
Yeah, it's really good. So the question was, what does do more good mean towards our workforce, and to talk a little bit about our workforce. And yeah, so the vast majority of our workforce is migrant, is Hispanic. Obviously, that's a touchy topic in today's political climate, right? And simple reality is that in a community that is dying, I don't want to cannibalize labor from my neighbor. In order for me to help my community thrive and prosper, I have to bring in new blood. Yep. Last question, people. But no, so that's the goal of what we're trying to do there. But there's some interesting dynamics that we've had as we've rolled out retirement plans and health insurance plans and bonus programs and so on and so forth. The rate of adoption by some of our employees has been, oh, I don't want that. I want money right now. I don't need you investing in my future. That's my job. Wait. And now, 7 years later, the light bulb's gone off, and hey, that's a big deal. This is really, really good for me. So those sort of things took a little bit of time to have everyone really understand and appreciate, but we're to the point now that we have a very open dialogue with all of our team members about, hey, what can I do to do better by you? Every farm, every operation has suggestion boxes, and you get some real crazy ones like, I need a Walmart. Well, I can't do that one for you, buddy, but I can do barbecues, that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's very much a continuous improvement mindset across the entire stakeholder ecosystem, whether that be the cow or the employee or our downstream or a community. It's just how do we make it better every day. Cool. So I think I have to go now. They're getting angry. Thank you.